Reading. Whether you enjoy it or not, you do it every day. You may choose to read by either picking up, it's not working, okay, by picking up a book, or by doing more mundane things like reading traffic signs, menus, or text messages. Us high school students are often forced to read for our English classes by either participating in mandatory independent reading or by participating in mandatory book clubs. Students often underestimate the value of these types of readings, but there is a significant benefit both types of reading can have on us adolescents. I love reading, so I was very interested in this topic and decided to base my presentation on it. There were two factors I wanted to analyze that affected adolescents while reading. First, emotional intelligence, or EQ, and second, cognitive function, or CF. I chose these two factors because teachers rarely talk about the importance of reading besides actual reading skills, and these two factors are very important for our lives. I thought it was important to first narrow down on a specific type of text. In a 2016 study released by PLOS ONE, Pino and Meza had 216 students read either a literary fiction book, a nonfiction book, or a science fiction book. Before and after their reading, they were instructed to take an empathetic ability test, which is a key component of emotional intelligence. The researchers found that there was an increase in the emotional intelligence of those who read the literary fiction novel, but nothing else. So now that I knew that literary fiction improved emotional intelligence, I needed to find if it had the same effect on cognitive function. In a 2013 peer-reviewed article, Burns, Blaine, Peretula, and Pye had 21 university students read a literary fiction book before bed. They read this book for 9 days, and the 9 days after they read the book in the morning, they had to take an functional MRI test or an fMRI scan. In the 5 days preceding and the 5 days after their reading, they also had to take an fMRI scan in the morning. The researchers found that when suspense was at its highest in the novel, brain connectivity was also at its highest. Because brain connectivity was previously shown to improve cognitive function because the links in our brain help prevent cognitive decline, the researchers determined that reading literary fiction improves cognitive function. Based on the results of these two studies, I decided to make the eventual participants of my study read a literary fiction novel. But what about book clubs? Does analyzing books in groups have the same effect as reading independently? Unfortunately, the information on this topic is very scarce. However, I did find a peer-reviewed study that in 2007 that Bernstein and et al. Discovered that social interaction improves cognitive function because social interaction exercises the same part of the brain that cognitive function tasks does as well. And I also found an article from the Harvard Business Review where Coleman stated that book clubs can improve emotional intelligence because of the social aspect. So what? We know that reading literary fiction independently and that the social aspect improves EQ and CF, but we have no actual data to prove that book clubs improve CF and EQ more or less than reading independently. In addition, there is no qualitative data on the subject. All the previous studies only looked at quantitative data. My final gap is that all the studies were on adults. There was no information on teenagers whatsoever. Because of these gaps, I decided to make my research question: how does reading literary fiction independently versus in groups affect the emotional intelligence and cognitive function of teenage girls? I chose teenage girls specifically because I go to a same-sex girls' school. My hypothesis was that emotional intelligence and cognitive function improves more with book clubs because it has the same actual reading aspects of independent reading in addition to the social aspect. I chose to use a mixed method approach, which means I conducted both qualitative and quantitative data. The quantitative data was used to compare and contrast the change in results of EQ and CF after reading independently versus in book clubs. The qualitative data was used to add another layer to the scholarly conversation. More specifically, I chose to use a convergent design. This means I collected both my qualitative and quantitative data before doing any data analysis. I chose to do this because the two types of data went hand in hand, and one did not prompt the other. The first thing I did in order to collect my data was recruit participants. Members of the independent reading group were high school students at my high school who were not taking English this semester. Participants of the book club group were also students at my high school, but they were taking English this semester, and they had book clubs that aligned with my time frame. For the qualitative and quantitative data, there was two questionnaires, an emotional intelligence questionnaire and a cognitive function questionnaire. The emotional intelligence questionnaire was adapted from Psychology Today emotional intelligence test, and the cognitive function test questionnaire was adapted from a Mayo Clinic article titled Mild Cognitive Impairment. My school psychologist and I worked together to help put together these questionnaires. We cut down on some questions, changed some questions, and decided to make the responses true or false to make it more feasible for the teenagers to answer, as well as me to interpret the data. There was also a qualitative questionnaire that were also based on the Mayo Clinic and the Psychology Today articles. They were open-ended questions. I administered these questionnaires anonymously through Google Forms. Here's how the data collecting process worked. For the quantitative data, the independent and the book club group each filled out the EQ and CF forms. Then they went on either to do their book club, which lengths varied, or their independent reading, which lasted 2 weeks. A few days after they finished their readings, they retook the EQ and CF questionnaire and the qualitative questionnaire. In addition, to add another layer to the scholarly conversation, I had the teachers of the book club fill out a qualitative questionnaire which asked them if they saw any changes in the CF or EQ of their students. Now moving on to my collected data. For the cognitive function independent group, we can see that there was a notable increase in the mean and median of 12.5%. In addition, you can see in the box plots here that the middle 50% of the data is in this rectangle here. And in the after, the rectangle shifted to the right, which means 50% of the people are scoring higher. Unfortunately, the group results have different results. Although not by a lot, less than 10%, the mean and median of the data decreased. In addition, the rectangle that has 50% of the data got wider, and the line in the middle of it, which means the second quartile and the third quartile, is farther to the left, which this means that 50% of the people scored worse than before. For the qualitative results, different results were shown. The majority of the independent reading group indicated an increase in cognitive function, but the majority of the book club group reported no change in cognitive function. For example, one student in the independent reading group said, quote, "Their ability to concentrate and pay attention has improved when it comes to their schoolwork," end quote. Moreover, a teacher stated that their students' ability to, quote, that their, quote, "reasoning was clear and better thought out," end quote. So overall, for the cognitive function conclusion, we have that independent reading has a bigger positive impact on cognitive function than book clubs. And although the teacher testimonies gave a positive cognitive function feedback, it was deemed unusable because they were talking about how the reasoning skills of their students relates to the book and not life in general. So because of all this, my conclusion for the cognitive function, for how literary fiction affects cognitive function is: reading literary fiction in book clubs has no effect on teenage girls' cognitive function, while reading literary fiction independently increases cognitive function. Now, moving on to the emotional intelligence results. In the independent group, we can see an increase in the mean and median. And same with the book club group, an increase of the mean and the median. For the independent group, the mean increased more than the mean of the group reading group, and the median of the group reading group increased more than the median of the independent group. The median is more valuable in this analysis because medians show the more accurate result of the central tendency of the hypothetical real population data. Another thing to note is that although the rectangles where the middle 50% of the data lies changes, it is not really statistically significant. Now for the qualitative data. The qualitative data shows similar results. For the independent reading group, everyone who responded to the survey said that there was no change in EQ. But the majority of the people who participated in the book club indicated an increase of EQ. Unfortunately, the teachers could not provide any testimony because we went online shortly after the book clubs ended, so it was hard to tell how the students interacted with each other. So for the emotional intelligence conclusions, we see that although book clubs and independent reading increase EQ, book clubs do so more. So the final conclusion for how literary fiction affects emotional intelligence is: reading literary fiction independently has a positive effect on teenage girls' emotional intelligence, and reading literary fiction in book clubs has an even greater effect on emotional intelligence. Before I go into the implications of my study, I would like to discuss a few limitations. First, the sample size. After unusable data was disregarded, only 5 participants in the independent reading group responded to the EQ and CF data questionnaires. And only 16 people responded to the cognitive function questionnaire for the group reading group, and only 26 people responded for the emotional intelligence questionnaire for the group reading group. Because of the small sample size, it is unlikely that my data reflects the true population sizes data. Additionally, although the independent reading group all read the same literary fiction group, the book clubs read a variety of different literary fiction books. This could have had an effect on the results of the questionnaires that wouldn't have otherwise been present if everyone had read the same book. Thirdly, it is possible that the participants of my study participated in a lot of independent reading or perhaps even book clubs before my study. It would have been ideal if reading was not a common habit of the participants in my study before they participated in my study to see the most possible change in EQ and cognitive function. Lastly, environmental factors. We live in a crazy world right now, and it is possible that outside factors affected the emotional intelligence and cognitive function results of the participants and not the reading. So what? What does this all mean? I have 3 suggestions. Teachers, if you don't already have book clubs, have more book clubs. They will improve your students' cognitive function. Second, students, read more. Your emotional intelligence and cognitive function will benefit. And I actually said that backwards. Your cognitive function will benefit, and in the book clubs, the emotional intelligence and cognitive function will benefit. And to everyone, make it known that reading does so much more for you than getting a good grade in English. An improvement in EQ and CF can help you have a more balanced life, in addition to even improving your mental and physical health. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation. I hope you learned a lot about the importance of reading. And before my teacher asked me my 3 questions, here are half of the photo references that I used in my presentation, and here are the other half. Thank you again.